on the Ethernet versus token ring, could it have gone differently? I think one of the areas where it could have gone differently has a couple of things behind it. One, Ethernet had a messiah. Bob Metcalfe was at Park. He had seen the future, had seen what the world was going to be like 10 years ahead in terms of ubiquitous personal computers that were all interconnected by high bandwidth. And he knew what he was promoting before the rest of the world did. In the 1980 to 1983, 85 timeframe, when the world was still thinking about mini computers, Bob was relentlessly promoting Ethernet throughout the industry as the network of the future. And not for what was then the current hardware, but for what was coming another 3 or 4 years down the road. So with Bob promoting it and Ron Crane calling you up on the phone and telling you why your implementation didn't work, which was a very real factor, the interoperability of Ethernet in the early years and the promotion of it was very heavily weighted. On the flip side of that, ArcNet didn't make it into 802. And had no charisma. It was a highly functional, significantly less expensive thing than Ethernet. And if some of the dynamics had been flipped on that, if it had been coming out of Albuquerque and it had a charismatic promoter, it could have taken at least the first round, and that would have perhaps laid the groundwork for token-based networks going forward.
Well, and in fact, it may have taken the first round.
Yeah.
When you look at the early workgroup plans, an outrageous amount of ArcNet got shipped. It was simple, it was cheap, it was simple, it was inexpensive, it ran on IBM RG62 coax, and it was good enough for moderate-sized deployments. It did okay. And the guys who shipped came up with things like, as funny as it sounds, LAN in a can, where you got a paint can with a half a dozen ArcNet adapters, some cabling, and Novell NetWare.
So the other thing that aided Ethernet in the early years was it had an evolution flexibility capability that Token Ring did not have. It had the AUI connector on it, which meant that it freed innovation in transceivers. And how transceivers were configured was sort of the most awful portion of it. And if it hadn't had that connector so that anybody could come up with a different transceiver and plug it in to any standard Ethernet card, I think there would have been a severe handicap.
Good question, Jeff.
Yeah.
It would appear to me that that was an accident of the early implementation, not an intentional separation. Is that true or not?
It was a feature of the early implementation.
Okay. But the benefit was an accident.
Yes, I think that's fair enough to say. The reason it was a feature is because of early Ethernet being built around having an active transceiver that clamped to the bus cable, and therefore it needed to be at a distance. And so you needed to have a connector to get up to it. But it was a happy accident, even though everybody in the world who's ever had any experience with it hated that damn
An awful
connector.
connector.
An awful connector.
Truly awful
Which,
connector.
which was an incredible misapplication of that connector, because that connector is designed to be an inline connector. And the slide locks on it are only good for resisting tension. They have no angular resistance at all. And so it falls off, and it's not designed to be put behind the panel and all kinds of other terrible stuff.
And then there was quite a stink when a number of vendors started shipping Ethernet products with screws rather than slide locks.
Non-conformant.
Non-conformant and proudly so.